Yeah. This section, right? Me too. I was thinking
Yeah.
about it yesterday. What other thoughts do you have?
Well, one is that I think within objectivism, this might be a tangential point, but I think that your beliefs aren't specifically within the realm of the mind, that your beliefs should be reflected in action. Not just should be, but your beliefs are reflected in the actions. It's not like you have a belief and then you have to specifically guide it to be taken into action, but that if we've habituated something, that does imply our beliefs. And if we believe something, it means we act in a particular way that you can't really contradict it unless you've literally chosen to ignore or change your mind about something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I remember we discussed that in relation to implicit philosophy, and we discussed
Yeah.
the example of if I smash my mouse in anger because Microsoft Word crashes, the specific events and actions are there to make the inductive generalization that I'm acting on the premise of a subjective universe. But that doesn't mean I hold that explicitly, but it's there. And so
Right.
that process of habituating something can reflect a philosophy that can be made explicit, but it's held implicitly. And so I remember we discussed it in relation to that a couple of
Yeah.
sessions ago.
Yeah. I also mean to say that to say you believe something, I think is to also imply that you act with regard to it, not just you say you have the thought but don't explicitly agree with it. I think to say what your beliefs are, to say you understand it, does implication exactly your actions. To understand would be to imply that you act with regard to it, that you can't really divorce the two. Once you've understood, you are already acting according to that idea. I think within objectives, and that would be the idea. It's not that you always have the idea and you always have to apply it to the action, but that your action is the idea, that who you are is more than just the idea you hold, but even what you do. And I think objectives have a deeper meaning to the word understand than just so I know how the logic functions, but to understand is act with regard to it.
Um, it Aren't we just then referring to integrity? Like, because there is a thing called understanding, which can or cannot be acted upon, but to then call it understanding if you don't act upon it is maybe that's a distinction worth making, but maybe it's just simply what we're referring to is in either the person is has integrity or not, because I can see how you can understand something and not necessarily act upon it or not yet know how to act upon it, especially when it's a skill. Like I remember us discussing, for example, and you brought up Mary's room in relation to this, like you can
Yeah.
understand the principles of tennis and the specific movements you need to make, but then the application is a separate there is, but you can still say someone understands tennis even if they can't
Yeah.
play.
We
So
could
I'm not
say maybe there's a range of understanding here, that understanding can refer to like a full and complete understanding implies integrity. A less amount of understanding might not necessarily imply that you know how to apply it to your life, or might not mean you have the full understanding. You have a big understanding, maybe, or a wide understanding, but to say you truly have a full understanding, I think would imply that additional level of integrity, even
okay,
to
but
be
why
consistent with regard to it.
to be
Why make that
consistent? Yeah,
distinction?
like why do you think that uh, understanding implies action? It
Um,
implies automatically. In what sense does it imply action? Are
well,
you
I think
saying it
to
sound
hold a
because it?
belief,
Yeah, sorry.
to hold a belief is to mean to say you understood it means you fully integrated it within your knowledge system with all the implications, and you have a deep grasp and not just understanding just the conceptual sense, but that you've been able to concretize it to that full and complete integration. I think that'd be necessary for a full, complete integration of a concept to really feel it in your bones in a way. I think that would convey a full understanding. It conveys to what extent really not just held the beliefs, but integrated as part of your life and integrated your actual way of living. I think that would convey a fuller understanding.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I I guess it's then just a question of what are the most useful distinctions you can make. Like, for example, is it helpful to make a distinction between understanding and applying something into practice? And is it helpful to make a distinction between, say, understanding a philosophy and the things it refers to, and then integrating it to the extent that you feel a principle as you would your head being chopped off? Um, so then it's a question of distinction in concepts. Like I'm with you on that. Is a like, if I were putting aside the discussion on understanding and what what it entails, that is the level I'd want to reach if I understand something. But I the the question of, is that subsumed under the concept of understanding or something else, to me is open, because there are many things I can think of, like tennis, even philosophy, that you can say you understand to a great extent, but because you have not practiced it for a long time, or because you have not applied it in many different contexts, it hasn't been automated in some sense, but you're still understanding it on a very deep level. It's just different from someone who has applied it consistently over 5 to 10 years. And so the question then becomes, is the concept understanding the one that is most useful for making that distinction between those two people, or is there some other concept that is useful for making that distinction?
Mm, I think for me, I would say understanding is still the best because I often use it to, or I might use that distinction to understand why somebody believes something they do. Like a way to understand to what are they actually advocating for? What if they express an idea? To what extent do their actions, or to what extent do I consider my own actions in terms of asking myself, do I understand this?
Right.
Um, it might in ethics it might be easier to do that. I'm not sure about something, let's say like chemistry. To what extent do you need to do to understand? I think with ethics you do. Ethics being because it pertains to volition and actions you choose. I think for at least as far as ethical beliefs, it your beliefs are reflected by your actions because it's so integrated, so part of your behavior and what you do. I'm
Okay,
not sure about applied. What? Go
I'm
ahead.
thinking of an example, and we could go with an ethical example, and where the need to make the distinction becomes more obvious. Say you're thinking about, you understand the virtue of independence, thinking for yourself, and then you also understand that is reaching conclusions by your own method, by a certain method of thinking and doing it for yourself. And then integrity means when you believe something, when you hold some particular belief, it's acting on that, regardless of the pressure you feel from other people. But you understand that, and you understand it very well. But now you're in a position where you're standing in front of 1,000 people, and you must object to some, or not object, or you must get up on stage and start talking to them about something. But you, in a moment of fear, you act on that impulse, and you back down, meaning you show a lack of integrity, because your sense of independence and your beliefs would say, well, in this case, I need to get up on stage. It's not even an argument. I just need to get up on stage and talk to and say something. And so in that case, you have someone with, I would say, full understanding, but because there's some element that has been, there's this subconscious emotional element that, and a process that has been habituated and automated, you can say they have full understanding, and yet in the moment, the fear is so powerful that it takes precedence. And so, you know, it would be wrong to say they don't have full understanding, because they do, but they just need to go through a kind of it's almost like they need to go through psychotherapy or CBT to slowly change premises to get them to act in accordance with that full understanding. And so in that case, there's someone who's got full understanding, but is not able, or it's very, very difficult for them to act on it without therapeutic intervention.
Okay, so you're saying there's a difference between there's full understanding and there's full understanding plus integrity. Is that what you're thinking of? And those are different things.
No,
That
I'm
full
saying,
under.
no, I'm just
Sorry.
saying that full understanding, if you lump in full understanding at, like, if you lump in acting according to what you believe as full understanding, you're not able to, there's an issue like that contradicts that example I gave, because in that example, we have someone with full understanding of integrity and independence. And yet I can imagine a scenario where, because of past errors, let's say you're so overcome by a panic or a fear, and you've habituated the process of responding to that panic or fear in a certain way, to the point where it even blocks cognition to some extent. And so you've got full understanding, but you're incapacitated. You don't have the ability yet to act on it. You need to go through a therapeutic, scientific program of intervention for you to get to the point where you're able to then integrate that, or put that full understanding into practice. And so I brought that up not to say that, this is another concept, just to say that to me, that example would conflict with saying full understanding includes always acting on, or like, because you can see all the consequences, you can immediately act on that full understanding. It like conflicts with that view of full understanding. That may be a characteristic of full understanding, but it wouldn't be we will go with an essential part, because you can have someone who has full understanding but isn't able to act, or really struggles to, like the example I gave of someone getting up on a stage because they haven't, there's some beliefs they have that overtake their cognition in a given moment, which they need therapeutic intervention for, or whatever.
Okay. So
Does that make
I'm
sense?
just gonna. It does. So I'm not saying it's. So it's a phrase that I'm thinking of here, like theoretical versus the practical. I'm not saying there's a particular error here. I'm just saying this might apply to thinking about that dichotomy, maybe, that you can understand the theory of, but in practical terms, you don't know how to apply.
Yeah,
And
sorry, Louis, you just broke up for a second. So I got that you said, so maybe just step back and start again.
there is an error going on here. It makes me think of, say, the theoretical versus the practical. Like, you might have a understanding of what's
Right.
proper and correct, but you might also be implying something like, despite that theoretical understanding, the practical action. So you can have the one without the other.
Yes.
There's a distinction between the two, and that's usually not a good way of thinking about it. So let's go over that, if that actually is that dichotomy even in the first place. So you say they don't know how, or in some way are not quite able to apply their belief, and I can understand the separation there. But what kind of belief? What would make it so that they can't?
So let's go to the person getting up on a stage. And so they understand that we survive by our own, like, we have to think for ourselves, because reason is an attribute of yourself, and you need to think for yourself. And they have thought that, okay, in this situation, when I get up on stage, the thoughts of these people do not have that much significance to me. They will not affect my life that much, but it's important right now that I get up on stage to speak about this issue. Not even let's not say it's an antagonistic issue, it's just a speech. But and then they understand integrity as well, which means act in accordance. In order for you to survive, you need to act in accordance with the beliefs and things you know are true. but because of, let's say, a childhood full of like bad emotional associations with people, they have this like overriding fear, and the fear is so overriding they can barely talk. And so then suddenly in that moment they might just give up. It's not like they could get up on stage, but maybe they wouldn't even be able to talk. And you know, there's that, I think it's the Yerkes-Dodson's law, where you reach a point where your emotions are so strong that cognitive function starts getting shut down. And so in that example, I'm not saying it couldn't be overcome. I'm just saying there is a gap between understanding and the ability to act on that understanding due to, we'll go with psychological issues and a implied philosophy that is false, but is so heavily automated that it requires scientific intervention to change. But I mean, that's the only, I mean, there's probably more examples of you could come up with where there is a gap in full understanding and ability to take action, but it's not, it would be resolvable. It's just to illustrate that. I don't think it necessarily follows that full understanding implies action, although it can, and it would be yeah.
Okay, let's go with what you're saying. And it's reason people do stage fright. That's the thing that happens. But
Yeah.
we'd want to ask, like, what is the belief, or what is it that's happening that makes them maybe have this emotional reaction we would recognize as not rational? Like, what would that mean? Some of you are saying it's biological. Well, some of you are also saying that the emotional response is off. Something is not right about their response, and they might see it too. Well, what exactly is off about it?
Yeah, so I don't think it's necessarily biological. It's only biological insofar as emotions are biological from my perspective. But I'm saying that, well, to work out the belief is difficult because it could vary from person to person. It could be something as simple as like, there's something wrong with me. It could be people are dangerous and powerful. Like you don't really know. Depends on the person and the childhood and the beliefs they formed non-explicitly, but through implicit, emotional associations. And so the belief could vary, but I don't think it'll necessarily be in words. It's a question of there is some you can. I mean, I guess this is, you know, it's a question of, so is belief something you hold explicitly, or is it, can you say a person has an implied belief? That's a question. But for now, we'll just go with they have a certain emotional associations that imply a certain view of people and in this situation that is false, but it's overpowering in that moment, and they have full understanding, but they're not yet able to act on that in a way that is consistent with that full understanding.
I think I can make it just.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain things up in your head, regardless of any reason or even belief. Like you might just have a belief pop in your head. I'm no good at this. I'm gonna do bad. It just pops in there. There's no real basis to it. It just happens. And for me, you're feeling this. You can't act with regard to your understanding because there's this, for whatever reason, there's this tension within you. You don't know what it is just yet. It just appeared. I mean, at that moment, you wouldn't say that your understanding disappeared. Like it's just a thing that,
Agree.
in the way certain thoughts just pop up, we might want to consider if, I wouldn't say those are examples of failure to understand as much as when it pops up, you apply your understanding, then it goes away. And I've had feelings like that before. I knew they were rational when they popped up. I thought a bit about it, went over why it's irrational, why it makes no sense, and the fear or anxiety went away. And that's what I'm saying, that once hypnotized or made your understanding real, these conflicting motivations kind of disappear psychologically because you're integrating the beliefs to your thoughts, but actually to your behavior. I think that's usually what integration will convey.
Okay. Yeah, with that, I agree with that. And where I'm not sure is like, so there's a process you go through to integrate conscious convictions you've reached. But then would you say would you say the person who's like explicitly understood a philosophy and has not yet acted upon it, like he's just learnt some concept, but he hasn't yet put it into practice, does he not yet have full understanding of the concept or the belief or the whatever the philosophy? Is it
I
only is
might I might not use the word understanding, say for the word mastery. Does he have mastery? No.
right?
Could he
Okay,
understand it? Probably. So
right.
maybe the word mastery might be a
Yeah,
better
maybe
word
that's
here.
capturing a distinction. And we brought this up in relation to evil. And so what was the we are so just to recap, we're saying that there's definitely a very strong tie between understanding and action. Like
Yes.
the kind of implication isn't necessarily automatic, but there is some implication if you understand something that it implies some kind of action or desire to take an action based on that understanding. Um, and then we just now we've come up with, okay, well there's full understanding, and but there's also something, maybe we'll just call it mastery for now, that we need to reach in order to be able to make use of our full understanding. But then so what, and we brought this up in relation to evil, and so what was your discovery as far as this goes with evil?
Um, I'm thinking question of um not understanding what would lead up to something so monstrous
Right.
would convey something about how far away they are from your understanding life is. They are, in a literal sense, just deviant from what most people believe to be true.
Right.
We can say that much at least. Why do they hold these beliefs that's so far from my understanding? Um, and I think usually within objectivism, being that far from our understanding might seem that they had to stop thinking at some level. They had to, something they're not thinking about. But also, when you say I don't understand, I think could do such a thing. Usually, you're trying to imply to what extent are they even thinking like you. So
Okay. Um,
if it doesn't make sense, of course, and one of the reasons, one of the biggest reasons you're doing something that monstrous is that you've actually arrested your thinking completely, and at least with regard to you've completely stopped thinking about one area of thought.
right. So you think you've changed, because at first I'm still not like, I think some of this makes sense, but I'm still a little bit, I don't feel fully convinced. It sounds like you've come to agree with Brandon, because that was Brandon's point, right? That the
I
guy
think
has a
so.
rest. Yeah. Okay. And what was the, at first you were trying to get at full understanding. You're trying to capture something about the relationship between understanding and action in your explanation of full understanding, full being implying action. So what were you trying to get at with that component in relation to this, of full understanding implying action in relation to this scenario of um
In a
yeah.
way, he couldn't have mastered that way of thinking of this value positive way of thinking because, by definition, if he's acting, well, he's not acting with regard to that belief. That's for sure. So at least we
Mm,
can say he probably doesn't have that belief that, say, value is a right action or is the right standard with something that I even remotely in the thinking
sorry,
about
Louis, the
values.
audio quality is pretty bad. Should we try turn off video? Like, it keeps cutting you off. Let's just maybe shut off both our videos, because we're looking at a text pad
Sure,
anyway. So let's see if that helps.
sure.
Okay.
Is
So
that
could you
better?
continue? We'll see. Could you just maybe start just from your
Yeah.
thought? You were going about the link between action and understanding in relation to the evil.
So assuming this person commits something so monstrous, we probably could safely say that they are not using even remotely similar to an action that we are, that they aren't even using a standard of what's value positive. They're not even cutting it.
They're
Even
not,
people who
it's the
barely.
quality is still cutting you off. So
Okay.
I might just, there'll be some things where I'll get you to stop just so you can repeat it. So
Okay.
they don't have the same standard of value. And then,
Yeah. And so um, I don't think they could have that. They couldn't by nature have full understanding, complete math of this way of thinking because they're not even using the way to think. And it would be fruitless to try to understand them in terms of value or going against values or even just, oh, people want things, so they do things to go to achieve those things. Like, no, you can't use that because they're so different than you and they're thinking here that, well, of course it doesn't make sense. They're not using any standard remotely that you're using.
right.
And
And
that might
then,
mean deliberately choosing not to think might be one cause of that. Or deliberately choosing like death is my standard and that's what I choose. Then, well, yeah, there's no understanding of what a person with that belief would do. You can have a full understanding of that. You don't embody that thinking, so you're not going to have mastery of that either.
do you think though that the person, if it was truly held in that form, that death is my standard, that well, I would just commit suicide. So it's usually more uh there's other stuff going on. Like even take, for example, in Atlas Shrugged, Jim Taggart, right? Like he's functioning, he's working, he's a CEO or whatever his role is. He's dealing with people, and yet apparently the underlying premise is death. It's a bit tricky when you think about it that way, because suddenly there's a person who's functioning in the world, doing all these things. It's not like he's immediately jumping into suicide or murder.
Yeah. But I
And
mean,
so
if we're
how?
thinking of something people think as monstrous, as beyond the pale of even anything people have ever observed, then yeah, it might go to extreme cases like that, that they are completely operating by a different standard you would never even think is conceivable.
Right. And so I'm still stuck with the what you're getting at with the full understanding implying action, like at the beginning, like the relationship between that and this issue of evil.
Um, can't understanding act in a way that's monstrous in this like murder. You
You got cut
couldn't
off.
do that.
Sorry. Can you got? Maybe we should. I'm wondering if we should try and go to Skype. Um.
Let's maybe let me reconnect.
Okay. Yeah. Let's try that. And the evil.
Um, let me just reread this quote of his. Oh well, this is saying if you can't, how could they do something terrible? Like implicit in the feeling of the person saying, "Oh, this is monstrous." How could they see the value of the life but choose to destroy it? Did
Right.
I lag out at all? Or did I
Yeah, a
still get
bit. But I'm if I'll only ask you if I can't piece it together.
okay? Um. So yeah, but then you would be trying to think in terms of understanding of what value is that you are using the way to judge action, and that you're assuming maybe the other people think value matters decisions, but it's not like you could have a full understanding like that. Really
Oh,
understand what
now I
value
get what you're
means.
saying. Okay, I get it. I
Yeah.
know what you mean. So you were trying to get at the fact that if someone had the understanding of the value of a life, that there's necessarily going to be some, or not. Let's not go with necessarily, but one of the characteristics of understanding is that we're talking about action. And so people act in a certain way in relation to that understanding. And so we're saying that someone has acted in this monstrous way, we're applying our understanding to it. But what's actually implied here is that they don't have the same level of understanding of value. That's what you were getting at, right?
Yeah, not
Okay.
even using value in their thinking. They're using some other standard that you might conceivable. That's why it makes no sense. How could
Right.
they do it? Well, they're not even operating on your way of thinking, or they're other human, like a lot of murderers. Well, I know there's been murderers that think they're somehow beyond normal humanity, that there's something inhuman or otherworldly about them, that they think the rules don't apply to them because there's something greater or some genius or something like that.
Right. That was part of the initial rationalization
Yeah,
of um, Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment.
yeah, it'd be like that. Then yeah.
Okay. And anything else in this section as far as evil goes?
That was it actually.
Okay. I'm still not. The reason I'm still on the fence and it makes sense, but the reason I'm still on the fence on this a little bit is that I'm like, I'm not clear on if we have, I just think, well, if we have free will, what stops someone from just acting against whatever they do perceive to be value? Like if you have free will, so you can do whatever you want technically, at least in my understanding of it. And I think that's what kind of where I'm stuck, because I'm like, well, all right, I can see that someone who doesn't value a child might kill him, and that you'd be, how can that happen? But this is incomprehensible. But then someone acting like against their beliefs and seeing value, like I'm still not clear on why can't that happen is where I'm stuck. Like
Yeah,
why couldn't someone just randomly, well, not randomly, just as a matter of free will, just make a choice to do something that is horrendously evil? Like,
I get what you're saying. I would I could give an answer, but I think it'd be just abstract that it won't really mean anything. So I think it'd be better to go back to that. Just once you read more about free will, it'd be hard to give a good answer because that wouldn't put you back to where you are right now anyway.
right.
So I
What
think
are the
might want to put
leads
that
then,
aside.
without going into it? What
Um,
would be the lead concepts that
like
I'm,
to what extent are there boundaries in free will? Like to what extent, like being free, does that mean an absolute freedom to do absolutely anything
okay.
whatsoever, or are there constraints? And you're almost thinking, if there's constraints at all, how could that be free will? That's kind of what you're asking.
Okay. And so there's one other thing I want to go back to in relation to this feeling of the metaphysically impossible and inconceivable. I can see how, I wonder if it's the specific aspect of that is terrifying, is that it's not that you say that, like you see something like an article like that in the newspaper and you're like, oh, you feel a sense of, we'll go with metaphysical impossibility or whatever. I don't know how to describe it, but the scary part about it maybe is the implication that the universe is a dangerous and chaotic place which you do not have the tools to properly perceive. Is that sort of what the feeling is getting at, do you think, of this person reading the article in the newspaper? And is that what sort of makes it so frightening, as opposed to yeah, go on.
I think so. Like in horror movies or H.P. Lovecraft things, like the Eldritch horrors, like things that are so terrifying that they're the root of all terror, and there's nothing conceivable. It's like a metaphysical terror that you really can't even describe. It's like
Oh,
it's not
okay.
even really conceivable. You can't even look at it within the fiction. If you can't even look at the thing without going crazy and then dying. It's that depraved. It's kind of like that.
I like the examples you gave because of the books you read. um, but well, that's really interesting, because so what you're saying is that when we say something is metaphysically impossible and inconceivable, we're saying it's a terror you cannot get underneath and analyze. There's no analysis. It is just this thing that exists out there and that might come get you. That's sort of the generalization, right?
Yeah, and it's irrational at base. Like it's just you can't even put words to it because it's like it's inconceivable.
Wow.
I mean, literally, it's inconceivable. But then, what if something inconceivable and incomprehensible were real? It would be like that. It'd be utterly terrifying that you
Yeah,
can't
that
even
would
put
be
words to it.
right.
But
But
we
if
know
you,
such things aren't real. But it's the feeling as if, what if such a thing were real?
what, that's super interesting. That because that gets it a lot. That really explains so much. Because I definitely would feel like this guy reading the newspaper, and now I'm like, well, of course it's still terrifying and terrible and disgusting. But you're like, what is being said is that there's a way to analyze this and find out what the cause is, right? And then
Yeah,
there's even an argument being made that this specific cause is impotent on in some way, which is not something I fully get. But suddenly you're breaking it down, you're analyzing it, and you're like
yeah,
you're affirming that the universe is understandable and conceivable, and
yeah.
there is no metaphysically irreducible terror, right? That is what's happening when you're going
I
through
would
this.
say so. Yeah, that you are
Oh,
making sense of it, despite I don't understand this one bit. Well, now you kind of are breaking. There is some kind of understanding here that Brandon's offering. It might not be rational or not like you empathize, but there's some sensibility or
right,
comprehensibility to what's going on,
right,
conceivability to what's going on.
right. And then I guess you could even, in understanding the root of this kind of behavior, you may even see evil in yourself when you do something small, like check your phone impulsively. I keep going back to that example, but it would be useful then if you do if you are identifying the root of such behavior, it'll probably be useful for you to enhance your life on the smaller levels in which you engage in it, right? Because you're grouping those things together, whereas before you wouldn't.
Yeah, especially in terms of thinking
Right.
clearly, because that's a lot of what he reduces it to. He puts it to something about some amount of thinking that you stop or
Yeah. Um, makes a lot of sense. I think the only thing that I'm not yet really concretized on is, which I don't want to get into now because it's a whole other topic, but I still am not like, I'm much closer now to understanding this. I'd need more examples and probably to read
yeah.
some books on actual cases, but yeah, I'm not convinced on the impotence of it. Like to me, it's still a
Yeah,
scary big thing. Like, oh, I can just come and destroy everything. That to me
yeah.
is not impotence, which is what is claimed. But
I think we'd have to loop back on it later. Once we get to
yeah,
free will or maybe some other topics, we can loop
yeah,
back.
yeah, for sure. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good. I was also thinking about how like it would apply to like, someone who's habituated acting in the moment on an emotion without thinking. And that might be someone who's like, let's say, punches their girlfriend in the face in a moment of anger, just because they've habituated. At that point, you could almost say it's not, it doesn't seem like a choice. It's the example you gave of like, it's the 1,000 choices they made to get to that point.
Yeah.
Um, but the root is the same, right? It's that not, because if you just act on an emotion without thinking, it's a form of non-perception, right?
Or evasion or dishonesty, or however you want to phrase it. I think all of those work.
But in the moment, like let's say in the moment that someone does that, like someone who abuses, just punches the
Yeah.
girlfriend out of anger, in the
Yeah.
moment you could say there was no evasion, it was an automated process, but there were specific steps that
Oh,
were conscious and were volitional to
yeah.
get to that point, right?
Yes. There are prior steps of evasion, maybe, or
Mm,
prior steps of dishonesty.
right,
Not that that action is dishonest, but
right,
you had to get there through dishonesty or
right,
get
right,
there
right,
through.
right. That's Cool. That makes a lot of sense because that's always where I've been confused. I'm like, I didn't, that was incomprehensible. Like this specific example was perfect because that is exactly what I feel if I read that. And I still do sometimes, but that makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. So, all right. Well, that's very interesting. Let's see if there's any other little random things that we can. So we were going to at some point, maybe later after I've gone through the epistemology curriculum, be able to like learn to go through studies and not in super
Yeah.
detail, but just get a general like let's say I want to buy a supplement. And I'm like, well, what is the actual evidence that this thing works? Because you can go to, the chemist and there are
Yeah.
like 10 different products. What am I relying on when I'm just like all these random claims they make? Is it all just a load of shit or not? Like, how do you tell unless you're able to go and just look up, all right, what is a meta analysis and what is this and what is that? And not
Yeah.
in the biggest detail, but in like just enough to be able to think a little bit on your own. So
Yeah. I've
at some
done
point,
things like that for people, so I've have experience explaining that. So yeah, I'll
yeah,
get
cool.
into that sometime.
We could I think we mentioned we could turn it into like a workshop series or something like that.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, next thing is willpower. There's a book I was reading a while back and it discussed willpower. And I was just curious, what is willpower? Free will, or is it focus, or is it, yeah, just this, if we look at the way it was explained here as a finite resource, and a loss of it in one area affects how much of it is left in another area. What is it? What actual concept is this getting at? Like when we're talking about willpower in this case.
I think it's something like
So if you see here, it
just the
talks about self-discipline. Like you can, if you work on being self-disciplined, you increase your willpower. Or like if you develop
self-control.
good habits, you get rid of all these basic decisions like what you eat and stuff, then you don't deplete valuable energy. It seems like it's mixing a lot of things in here, but
It does.
uh, willpower
I
is
think it
worked
was
for. Yeah.
just self-control, or maybe not even control, just um like deciding on goals. I don't think willpower is a resource, though. I don't think there's good evidence for that. What people mean when they say it, but I don't think it's a resource as much as it's just like anything else that's cognitive. You have to, I mean, use as much energy as anything else. You could maybe you can get tired, but I don't think it is the same as loss of willpower. A loss of energy just to act, but not necessarily a, a will.
So in this case, do you think I'm only thinking this now, maybe he's capturing multiple concepts under this thing he calls willpower.
I think so. I think it gets a bit convoluted when it combines a lot of concepts. I do know what people mean that if you're consumed in all your attention on one thing, it might seem that you're that less able to focus on other things at the same time. But I think
Yeah.
it's more a matter of focus, not so much willpower
Or concentration. I heard the concentrate, which
or
I'm not fully
concentration.
clear on, but like I heard there's some distinction between concentration and focus. Focus being something like you've set a goal, and then concentration being like the intensity with which you're thinking, something like that.
It sounds like just a metaphor because when you can ask resource of what? Like, what is it? If you're
Yeah,
saying
you're
it's a
right.
resource, what is decreasing? I mean, do you
I
mean
don't know.
calories? I mean, if you mean calories, that's just energy to act, which isn't really a willpower. It'd be the same thing as your ability to, like, I don't know, just like do calculus in your head. It's not really will fleeting, but I don't know, maybe the other and the
I
calories are
don't
really
know.
just a function. So it's not
So,
a willpower resource, probably. It's just a but you can only focus on so many things at once
but
in
do you
that
think then
nature.
the restrictions, like people often get at, I can only do X amount of productive work a day. Do you think then that's an arbitrary creation, in the sense that actually we could, there's no reason why we can't, I couldn't, for example, study for, like, obviously I need to sleep, but let's say I said, all right, well, I'm just going to study philosophy from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. There's no reason, like in full focus, full concentration, which I don't do, but there is that feeling of, and it is a feeling like, well, I have a limited amount of ability to be productive. And so do you think that's arbitrary, or what? If we're,
No,
I
I
don't,
think maybe we could maybe refer to cognitive capacity. You can only think of so many things at once. And that's the point of epistemology, that there's a limit to what we can hold in our mind. So we need to condense or reduce what we think about at a time. We have to make our focus onto a certain amount of units. We can't have infinite units to pay attention to. But we wouldn't call that a willpower resource. The resource maybe we would say is just cognitive capacity, how much we can hold in our mind at once. How many
but
units can we hold in
sure,
our
that's,
mind?
with that example, I agree with, but that would still not um, answer whether or not you could, because, if I'm talking about getting up at 6 a.m. and studying till 10 p.m., for example, like it doesn't imply that I'm necessarily trying to hold 50 things in my head at the same time. I could be working through a text, and at each given moment, I'm obviously holding
Yeah.
whatever my maximum capacity is at the same time. And so do you think there's like, yeah, so what do you think of that? Because is the fact that, because I feel like it's kind of an accepted thing. And maybe it's a rationalization. There's only a certain amount of productive work I can do. There's a certain amount of willpower. But is there any? What are your thoughts on that? Because I agree with cognitive capacity being like, let's say we can hold 5 units, 6 units, whatever. But that doesn't necessarily say anything about working from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. and reading through different
Yeah.
books and
And
working on texts.
I prefer to say that range of capacity can decrease over time as you fatigue, as your body gets tired, as your brain
Okay.
consumes more calories and you lose energy. But I might be thinking, say, we can think in terms of somebody says you eat a bag of potato chips and they say they don't have the willpower to not eat the entire bag. But all the time I a bag of potato chips and not feel like a will I need to apply to stop eating the bag of chips. I just, it's no, not even a will of mine. It's just, I decide I don't want to, and that's it. It's not even like a capacity. And I would wonder, people saying that they have no willpower, is it really that they have no willpower, that they can't control their action? Or do they mean that I would usually apply, say, they haven't integrated the right behaviors? It's not that the resource is limited or that I drained my resource, but I changed my way of thinking about it. I didn't gain more willpower. I didn't gain more resources. I mean, in fact, I didn't really change anything except what I think about what I eat, maybe. That's all I've changed when I know how to control my habits.
Okay. Maybe it is, uh, like going back to the example on evil, like habituating certain patterns that make it very difficult in the moment to resist something, because of the pathway. If you want to go with, I don't like these analogies because I don't know anything about the brain, but you've definitely automated something. It's just very easy to act on it. And
Or I've condensed it so much that I'm only thinking one visualization, maybe, or one image that comes to mind, that other people might have like 10 different things they have to consider, like how they feel, their mere desire for things that feel good, or whatever kind of thing comes in their mind. But for me, I might have less popping in my mind. Therefore, it's easier to think about and control my actions in the way I wish.
one, you talked about there could be an issue of you getting, if I worked from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., I could be getting tired. There is a problem with that, because if we're speaking of calories, your body, most of us have something like, let's say, over 5 to 6% body fat. And I've done these calculations, and I've tried fasting and all these things. Most people can go without food and survive for like over 20 days, 30 days, and they're fine. You don't lose muscle, you don't lose anything. You just need electrolytes and vitamins, and you're fine. You're completely fine. And so it cannot be an issue of calories or energy. There's something going on. So I do wonder if maybe it is an artificial limit in terms of focus.
Yeah, I mean, you might
Sleep
be
is
right
one
there.
thing. Sleep is one thing, but calories would be a different one.
Yeah, I mean, you might be right that there's probably some resource, but I just dispute the willpower resource.
Right.
That's the resource going on.
Right. Willpower being some unclear and vague grouping of multiple.
Like a wish or sheer
Yeah.
will to
Okay.
accomplish something.
Right. Well, actually, maybe willpower includes motivation, and it's a motivational. And
Sure.
actually, I don't know, because the whole point of willpower is you're not motivated and you act anyway. So, uh,
Yeah, I
hmm.
think it's a messy concept to use.
It is, yeah.
I get
Actually,
it, but it's just messy.
I agree with you. It's messy. It's including multiple things. Okay, so we can't point to any specific. We can't say it's concentration. We can't say it's focus. It because it also includes discipline, which includes certain habits, and so it's very, uh, and then it's talking about energy, but there's a problem there with calories because we have enough calories all the time, no matter what. Yeah. So
Yeah.
okay, we can go to the next thing in the time we have left. If we can fit in Mary's room now, we can do that. Otherwise, this is just a random silly question. Do you think there's a distinction to be made between a reason for something happening and a cause?
Mm, yes. I
Okay.
okay. A reason could be phrased as what about the nature of reality makes this the case? You could say
Mm,
that's the reason electrons go around an atom or orbit an atom is because they have a negative charge. I mean, it's just the nature of electrons do that. It's not like something decided or chose for it to be that way, just that it's the nature of its identity. And a choice being setting into motion for a purpose. I mean, that's maybe saying um, to choose to do something or a cause for something. I think a
but
cause is more specific.
I would have thought the opposite. The cause, like the example you gave of I forgot what it was, but it was something about the universe. But in that case, couldn't you just as well replace the reason that this happens is because of these electrons, as to the cause is that electrons are like this, something like that. Isn't that the same?
Um, I think a cause usually implies a prior event or prior object leading to this thing. Like an ape, a billiard bar hits another billiard ball. The first billiard ball caused the previous one or caused the next one to move.
The cause,
Versus,
yeah, go on.
yeah, that's you can ask in terms of what made this happen? What billiard ball made this billiard ball move? But a reason could be like asking, why does existence exist? But you say, what reason does it exist? Well, it's its identity to do that. There's no reason for it anymore. There's a reason that billiard balls move when hit. I mean, it's not like what caused them to have this identity. Well, not necessarily anything. It's their identity. There's no real prior reason to that being the case any more than there's a prior reason why existence exists. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I'm not, I'm, I'm seeing, I'm just ending up seeing them as referring to the exact same thing. So a reason is just another way to say cause. Because originally I thought, well, maybe I guess in some contexts, reason refers to something volitional. Like no one ever says,
Yeah,
what is the cause for your action? They're like, what reason?
yeah,
Why? But I'm just seeing
yeah,
now as there's no difference. Like even with the billiard ball example you gave, like it's not even the question of which billiard ball made this one move. It's like, oh, it was a guy who took his snooker stick or whatever and hit the billiard. He's the cause and he's the reason for the billiard balls moving. And
I mean, I
then
guess reason and cause are synonyms. I'm
yeah.
thinking about that maybe there isn't really a point, just know which way you're using the term. That when somebody asks why is that, they might be asking a prior reason for this happening, or they might be asking why does it have this identity. I think people sometimes imply one or the
Okay.
other.
I know what you're saying. Okay. I think you're saying that sometimes it's a question of cause is a question of the identity of something, whereas sometimes, or the nature of something, and reason is a question of what precedes, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't know. But you're saying that there's a sometimes people are referring to like, what is the preceding action? And sometimes they're referring to what is the nature of the thing that leads to this. Am I getting that distinction right?
Yeah,
Or,
that's what I'm saying. At
okay.
least I recognize that sometimes Christians care about that distinction, that when they ask why, they always mean the same why. Like, what is the prior cause for the law of identity? What is the prior cause to
Right.
electrons having negative charge? And they
Right.
would say, well, everything needs a cause. Therefore, God is the source of that aspect of reality.
Right.
And that's what I mean. It matters if you understand why the question is being asked, or which
Okay.
question is meant when you ask that question.
Right. Uh, okay.